Let us pray. May these words from my mouth be acceptable in your sight, O God. Thank you, Terrence and Corral and all of you for such a beautiful rendering of the gospel reading today. These beautiful words, also known as the Magnificat, are most often sung majestically and seriously. These words are powerful, and yet they are subversive and audacious, and perhaps could be seen as foolish. They are all of these and more when one considers that they are spoken by a pregnant, unwed, and likely very young woman, a girl, someone who in her time and culture, and perhaps even in our time and culture, possessed the least amount of respectability and credibility. In medieval European Christian practice, these words instigated a festival called the Feast of Fools and carnival that poked fun at the hierarchy of both the church and society. Lay brothers and servants put the vestments on inside out, held books upside down, wore spectacles with round orange peel instead of glasses, and blew ashes from the censers on each other's face and hands. And instead of proper liturgy, chanted confused and inarticulate gibberish, cross-dressing, masking as animals, wafting foul-smelling incense, and electing burlesque bishops, popes, and patriarchs mocked conventional human pretensions. So did the introduction of an ass into the church and the braying of the priest, choir, and congregation during Mass. This literal acting out of reversals was an odd witness to the God whose inclination is to topple human structures, power structures, and to raise the downtrodden to a position of honor and feasting. It is interesting that this feast was never an official feast of the church and was later banned. Ruth Mooney visited us last week, a missionary with the ABC USA, and she's at the seminary in Costa Rica. She shared about some of her journeys to various faith communities in Latin American countries, communities of indigenous people. One picture showed indigenous people acting out a story which depicted the Spanish, their colonizers, as inept and bumbling. The story of reversal spoke how Spanish domination is still a reality in the culture of the people. What is the context of these powerful and subversive words of the Magnificat that inspire these reversals? A young woman from Nazareth has seen an angel. She receives a vision of incredible news. She has found favor with God, and she is to bear a son, the Holy Son of God, no less, and she is not yet married and is still a virgin. How is this to be? It will be the work of God, for whom nothing is impossible. She also receives a vision of incredible comfort. Her relative, who had long been barren, is also with child. Which act of God is harder to imagine? Which scenario is less foolish? Mary's reaction is twofold. She offers herself as a servant of the Lord, joining herself to God's work within her and in the world. Then she runs off to see her relative Elizabeth. I envision the meeting of these two women as a joyful and giddy event with much laughter and hilarity, a joining of hands, dancing of feet, and leaping in the womb. Their loud cries of greeting and welcome are alternated with muffled and astonished whispering and weeping. Elizabeth proclaims, "Blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord." It is then that this young woman boldly speaks with gratitude and praise to God for the work of God that reverses the ways of the world. What is so striking is that she speaks to the fulfillment of this work. This is not a song of hope about what God will do someday through the Messiah. She does not say someday God will bring down the powerful, but that God has brought down the powerful. It is a song of gratitude for what God has already done and for what God is doing. This is curious, coming from the mouth of this young woman as she lived under Roman occupation and dominance. Mary saw the fulfillment of God's work for justice in the world when she willingly joined God in this work. Mary's words to the angel, "Let it be with me according to your word," set her on a dangerous path. Believing in the fulfillment of God's justice in the world is hard work with many obstacles. Young, unmarried, pregnant Mary from Nazareth went back home after 3 months, just when she was beginning to show. She would face certain ridicule from her community. In her book, Just a Sister Away, Renita Weems points out how odd it was for Mary to live with a blessing that caused more problems than it fixed. Weems posits that Elizabeth, having experienced years of public ridicule and shame because of her barrenness, would have been able to help Mary prepare herself for the same public ridicule and shame for her unplanned pregnancy. The companionship of Elizabeth gave Mary the boldness and courage she would need to face the challenges ahead. Both of these mothers would pass on to their sons this strength to face adversity. Our faith witness, Addie Davis, believed in the fulfillment of the promise God spoke to her. In a time when many thought it was a sinful thing for a woman to be a pastor, she had no doubt of her call. In spite of obstacles, she attended seminary and received a call to pastor a church. Like Mary running to Elizabeth, Addie sought ordination in her home congregation. Even their refusal did not deter her. She knew how important it was for her call to be confirmed by the community and found Watt Street Baptist Church, a community who danced with her in her joy for her call to ministry. It was Watt Street Baptist Church who said to Addie Davis, "Blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord." It was this confirmation that sustained Addie as she entered into the foolishness of God's work in the world and in her life, confident of God's call in spite of the criticism she received. This church has faced several difficulties, similar difficulties, as it has joined in God's work for justice in the world. The fact that we are a Baptist church and with a welcoming and affirming stance is its own reversal in the eyes of many in our denomination. Like Addie Davis, we did not find affirmation in our own geographical region. So we sought out a community that could affirm our commitment to this work for justice, which we found in the Rochester-Genesee region. At UTS right now, UTS is where I go to school, seminary, there is an art display of works done by students in the art practicum course. Along with their art was a description of the thought and heart process of the artist. In one such description, an artist of paint on canvas wrote of the mutuality that occurs between himself and God in the process. He begins with the paint on canvas, and it is there that God joins in, and soon it is simply him and God meeting together. The result is a creative work that would not have happened if only one or the other were involved. On his own, the artist could create, but it would be different than what turns out when he meets God in the process. Certainly, God creates, but God's work is shaped and changed by the particularities of the artist. In this scenario, both the artist and God are changed. For Mary and Elizabeth, the work of God literally was conceived within them and grew out of them, like paint on canvas from the heart of an artist. The work of God for justice in the world is not something that happens out there, but begins intimately and personally. As we pay attention to the visions before us, we also find opportunities to see the fulfillment of God's work for justice in the world. Roy Medley, the General Secretary of the ABC USA, has written a call to action on behalf of the people of Burma and the human rights abuses they suffer. Medley's letter states that although the U.S. News is currently reporting improvement in the situation in Burma, the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's visit certainly offers some small glimmer of hope. The reality is that while they are engaged in diplomatic conversations, the military continues to confiscate property, burn entire villages, gang rape women, imprison and torture men, and kill civilians. We are issuing a call to prayer and action on behalf of the peoples of Burma. What do we, members of University Baptist Church in Minneapolis, Minnesota, have to do with anything in Burma? What do we, who can be frustrated with our own government on both the state and federal levels, have to say to the leaders in Burma? Is it not foolishness? Yet we do need to raise our voices with the clamor for justice. Because of the work long ago of another Baptist, Adoniram Judson, we have many Baptist sisters and brothers in Burma who are among the poor and the oppressed. Not only are we connected over there, we are connected here in our relationship with the Burmese refugees who came to UBC for support in ministry and getting settled in this country. The work of God in Burma is a work that is personal to this community. Roy Medley is visiting UBC next weekend. We will have an opportunity to confirm his prophetic word and join in God's work on behalf of the Burmese people. In less than 1 year, there will be an option on the ballot asking people to put in place an amendment to the state constitution that will read that only a union of one man and one woman shall be valid or recognized as marriage in Minnesota. Approval of this amendment would add another layer against the civil rights of LGBT persons in this state, making it an even longer road to overturning existing laws preventing same-sex marriage because they will be upheld by the state constitution. This constitutional amendment is a personal issue for UBC. UBC's statement on marriage includes strong language regarding this issue. We can ask ourselves, how will we join in with what God is doing in the world? How might the outcome of next November's vote be affected by our involvement? What might it look like without our involvement? How can UBC help to meet with others who are already joining in the efforts to rally citizens to vote no, like Outfront Minnesota or other welcoming congregations? Is it foolishness to believe that we could have an impact on this issue in our state so that someday all Minnesotans will have the right to marry? Yet, according to the witness of Mary, the fulfillment of God's work is not in the outcome. The fulfillment of God's work for justice in the world happens when God's people hear and respond to the invitation to join in the work. This is cause for celebration. God is at work, and we are invited. God's work for justice in the world is not limited to pastoral calls, prophetic words to governments, or state legislation. God's work for justice is fulfilled when individuals like Mary listen for angel footsteps and foolishly enter in. God's work for justice is fulfilled when people show up at neighborhood meetings about freeway walls. God's work for justice is fulfilled when individuals show up at Loaves and Fishes and the homeless are fed. God's work for justice is fulfilled when individuals gather and distribute these Advent gifts. God's work for justice is fulfilled when individuals cook meals for victims of HIV. God's work for justice is fulfilled when we care for each other in this community. All these things take time and effort and we stumble into obstacles, and we wonder if it's all worth it. We wonder if we can really make a difference. This is when we seek out each other for confirmation of the work that God has called us to do, dancing together in foolish hilarity, because blessed are we who have believed that there will be a fulfillment of what God has spoken to us. May it be so.